a fleeting sliver of happiness. It was a gray Monday afternoon, fitting of a bleak workday. The sun had been much too shy to so much as peek through the thick clouds that threatened a rain which never came. Sean sniffed the typical November smell and sighed softly. He let himself sink into the plastic train station chairs, as he was in no hurry to get anywhere at all. He never did like train stations, thought of them as unquiet places that collected miserable faces. There was no cheery loudness about, only a buzzing of hurried chatter mixed with the hissing of trains. Sometimes the barely audible and muffled intercom lady echoed through. People were too lost in themselves to listen. Nevertheless, every day after work, Sean sat in those pale yellow chairs, and he watched people come and go like one would watch busy ants before getting into a train and going home. People watching was soothing for him, and he oft wondered of their lives, woes, cheers, and pains. It was a difficult concept to grasp at first that others could possibly be as complex as he was. He did not connect well with others. His childhood had been exceptionally lonely. When his mother was not working double shifts so they could eat, she was utterly plastered and out of herself. She was not a mean drunk. She was simply not there. And in hindsight, Sean no longer blamed her for her absentee parenting. He was glad she had held on as long as she did, which he now knew came from nothing but the love she had nurtured for him. He felt an itch in his nose and sneezed, startling a sleeping pigeon. Besides the itch in his nose, there was an uneasiness in his gut that told him today was not just another day. Yet he could not quite pinpoint it. All had been the same as every other day before it. Work had been dull, as quiet as ever, as he sat behind his desk, in his little cubicle, with his cup of coffee and his lines of code. His workmates were not sociable creatures, and he, regardless of his yearning for other humans that he struggled to communicate and thus fulfill, had not the energy for forced and fake interactions. He checked his phone for notifications. He was not great at socializing, but he could not be blamed for lack of trying, though his profiles on meeting apps were not particularly enticing. There was nothing, and he slid the phone back into his pocket. "Hi," he heard next to him, and shuffled anxiously. He truly disliked people who sat next to him yapping away on the phone, especially when there were more seats available. There was something irking about a phone conversation, how you could only get a grasp of half the story, leaving him with a haunting craving for more that, depending on how interesting the snippet had been, would insist on pestering him for days with possible outcomes. The regular conversations never did leave that hole, even if he was forced to fill the story gaps on his own. Perhaps there had even been studies done on that, but he was much too lazy to read. "Hi," the soft voice insisted. Sean turned his head slowly, glancing to his left as he shuffled some more. There was a pair of curious green eyes looking at him, and there was no phone to be seen. "Hi," he replied tentatively. His voice faltered him ever so slightly, and he cleared his throat. "Are you all right? Could I help you?" He thought whether the owner of those mesmerizing emerald eyes was lost or scared, or had any other reason of force majeure that had forced her to speak to him. "You sit here every day," she replied, as a matter of fact. "Yes." "I know you do." Her voice was soft and melodic, and Sean felt enthralled, even if he did not trust her fully. He subconsciously reached for his wallet and felt the bump in his coat pocket, relaxing slightly. He looked around, but there was nothing shady going on as far as he could tell. "You sit here alone, gazing towards nowhere, and you will do it for hours. Yet there are trains every 15 minutes in the direction you are going. But you just sit." "Yes," he replied again, shrugging with a little shame. That was it then. She was confronting him because she had thought he was some sort of creep ogling unsuspecting girls. And she was a pretty one at that. He had noticed her of sorts, sitting on the opposite platform. Sometimes it gave him comfort to see familiar faces, to recognize those who had shared a similar routine and grind, and he felt an unspeakable bond towards them. Admittedly, he had never paid her much attention. She sat much too far off, and the trains kept blocking her from view. She smelled like strawberries and cinnamon. "My train only comes every 2 hours, so I sit too. I thought you would like to know." She spoke very plainly. For some, it could perhaps come across as rude, but Sean found it particularly refreshing. He observed as her long, thick curls bobbed up and down as she spoke. "I figured we could sit together, just this time. There is a sadness about you." "I'm not sad," he started, but she waved her hand and cut him off, which took him aback. "I never said you were sad. I just said there was a sadness enshrouding you. It's as if it sits on your shoulders, weighing you down. You look around us, and everyone else is carrying their own demons," she continued, and Sean nodded in agreement. "Some hide it better than others, and some have learned how to live with them." "Which one is you?" he asked. "I am friends with my demons." "Would you know? I had a terrible day at work," she shrugged. Sean enjoyed the way she spoke very much. Her bluntness and honesty were a breath of fresh air, especially in a stranger. "But I would not want to bore you with that. When I finally got off, the day was as gray as my core. And then my bus got stuck in traffic, and I missed my train. You know, the one that only comes every 2 hours. So I sat in that plastic chair over there, and as I got my phone from my purse, my battery died." "That sounds awful indeed," Sean agreed, as she paused for some air. He felt rather sorry for her, although she did not seem particularly fussed at her own misery. "My day was... well, never mind. Do go on." "As I threw my phone back in my purse, with perhaps a bit too much force, mind you, I could feel a wave of..." She gesticulated and shrugged. All these unfortunate events were really taking a toll on me. But then I looked up and I saw you." "You saw me?" Sean smiled inquisitively. "There's nothing particular about me." "But there was," she assured him. "There was something about you, as there is something about her." She nodded towards a girl nearby, lost in her music. "And about him, with that book I cannot quite see the cover of. Or about that mom reining in her 2 kids and smiling kindly at them, even though she's clearly exhausted. And I felt drawn to you. I felt I should sit here." "I think I'm glad you sat here. I'm sorry I'm not—" He trailed off, picking his brain for words. "I'm not very chatty, I suppose. I'm no good at this." He smiled softly again. "I'm glad I sat here too. I like your smile." He got a little flustered, but kept his composure. "All I'd ever seen was your frown. Same for most of these strangers. Do you not wonder how beautiful they must look when they smile?" She shrugged. "It's all right that you're quiet. I've been told that I'm too keen to chat, and my words are rough, so we do balance each other out." "We do." He wondered what he should be saying or asking. He worried, yet he also felt at ease. Her presence was terrifying, but soothing, and the cinnamon, which had smelled so odd at first, had suddenly become familiar in these 20-odd minutes. "I must say, you've quite brightened my day." A drop of rain hit the ground, then another, and then it began pouring. "I had almost forgotten it was a November afternoon." "I like the rain. I like the way it smells. I like the way it can make a day look so gloomy, yet feel so cozy." She looked inside her purse. "What I do not like, however, is the fact that I left my umbrella at my office." And she laughed at her misfortune. Sean could not help but laugh too. He had felt more in this short, fleeting moment than he had in a long, long while. He figured he would say it, but it sounded like too much. "I have a feeling you do not let yourself feel often," she remarked. He did not say anything for a while, and she did not push. A train came, and off it went, and they watched the station refresh itself with people, with souls wandering about their daily lives. When she deemed the silence painful enough, she reached out and squeezed his hand softly. Sean's first instinct was to withdraw his hand, to recoil in fear. He was not used to any intentional touch, other than pushes and shoves while hopping on the morning train, always filled to the brim. But he did nothing, and she withdrew her hand back to her lap, as if she knew exactly just how much was necessary for a small comfort, just enough of a kind human touch. "You were right before," was all he said. "I know." The rain was still pouring, and it drowned the rest of the sounds in a most pleasant way. For a second, it felt like Sean and this girl, this stranger, had spent an eternity in their own bubble, undisturbed. She looked at the clock. "My train will be here soon." She had grown quieter now. Perhaps she was tired. "I wish I had had the courage to meet you sooner, but I'm glad I met you at all." "Thank you for today," he said, as she got up whilst looking into the distance, searching for her train. She still had to run to the opposite platform. "I'm Sean." "I hope I've lifted your spirits." I hope you tame those demons of yours. I'm sure you'll find your happiness. It is somewhere out there." She got her purse around her shoulder. "As I hope mine is." As she stepped out into the rain, he got up and shouted after her, "Hey, hold on, I never quite got your name." She turned around in the rain and stopped only briefly, but long enough to get soaked. "Anything you want it to be, Sean," she yelled back and waved enthusiastically. She disappeared into the crowd, and not long after, her train too came and went. A couple of minutes later, as the last hint of strawberry and cinnamon vanished, and all that was left was the smell of rain and wet concrete, Sean heard the muffled words of the intercom lady over the speakers, and one of his trains came. He rushed inside and let himself sink into an open seat. He could feel a newfound surge of energy rush within his veins, and the uneasiness in his gut had become a sort of contentment. He looked over at the rather glum stranger sitting next to him. After pondering for a minute, lulled by the rolling train, he smiled warmly at the stranger. "Hi." The end.